The envelope came from the insurance company, not a medical provider, which is why I opened it without a second thought. Years earlier, we had settled into a simple routine. Anything related to insurance, taxes, legal matters, or banking got opened by whoever picked it up first. It wasn't about access or control, it was about efficiency. That arrangement had never been tested because nothing had ever surfaced that required explanation. Until this did. Inside was an explanation of benefits, not a bill, not a medical record, just the insurer's standardized summary of services billed against our policy. It was dense and impersonal, filled with service dates, provider identifiers, and procedure codes that only mean something if you slow down and look them up. I noticed the date before anything else. A weekday afternoon that coincided with a time my wife had said she was meeting a friend after work. Nothing about that on its own was unusual. She had come home at the expected hour. Her behavior that evening had been unremarkable. What caught my attention were the procedure codes. They were not codes associated with annual checkups, ongoing treatment, or follow-up care. They corresponded to laboratory screening panels, multiple panels ordered together. The type typically used for preventive testing rather than diagnosis, specifically sexually transmitted infection screening. I went through the document again carefully, verifying that I was reading it correctly. The insurer categorized the services as preventive. There were no related diagnostic codes, no pregnancy-related billing, no hospitalization, and no other procedures that would have explained the panels as incidental. And the services were not attributed to me. I had not scheduled testing, I had not been treated, I had not received any notice that would suggest shared exposure. I did not confront her based on a single document. Real situations do not resolve that way, and I am not impulsive with conclusions. I waited. Over the following weeks, I paid attention to structure rather than emotion. Scheduling habits, how tightly she controlled her time, how she reacted when plans changed unexpectedly. There was no overt secrecy, no obvious mistakes. What stood out was consistency, the kind that suggests deliberate care. That suggested that if something was happening, it was being managed cautiously. When a second explanation of benefits arrived, the remaining ambiguity disappeared. Different service date, same provider group, same set of screening panels, same preventive classification, 2 separate STI screenings, weeks apart. That sequence is uncommon without a precipitating reason. As the primary policyholder, I requested a consolidated claims history directly from the insurer. The process took time, which was expected. Insurers verify, log, and release information slowly by design. The records confirmed 2 separate outpatient visits. Both were billed as preventive screening. No diagnoses were listed, no clinical notes were included, no justification was required from the provider beyond the standard billing submission. By itself, the testing still did not constitute proof of infidelity. People test for a range of reasons, including anxiety or prior exposure. What mattered was repetition. In stable, monogamous marriages, repeated STI screening without an identified medical concern is statistically uncommon. I waited longer. I wanted corroboration that did not depend on interpretation alone. That came from timing. One of the service dates overlapped with a professional conference she had attended out of town, a legitimate event I had not questioned. She had returned home tired, routine intact, nothing in her behavior that would have suggested immediate guilt or panic. That alignment did not prove anything on its own. It did establish opportunity. I arranged my own screening through my physician shortly afterward. Not out of fear, but because documentation matters when uncertainty escalates. My results were negative across all panels. That fact did not accuse anyone. It narrowed possibilities. When I raised the issue with her weeks later, I did not frame it as an accusation. I described the discrepancy between the insurance records and what I understood about our life together. I asked for an explanation of the testing. The response followed a familiar progression: denial, suggestion of billing error, implication that I was misreading codes, and the assertion that I was overstepping by examining insurance documents. I did not argue. I documented. I contacted the insurer again to clarify procedural questions only. Whether the same patient identifier appeared on both claims. It did. Whether such screenings could be auto-generated. They could not. A clinician must order them. That ruled out administrative error. When I revisited the issue, the explanation shifted. The testing was reframed as precautionary. Anxiety was cited. A vague health concern was mentioned without detail. That explanation failed to account for the repetition. Preventive screening prompted by anxiety is rarely repeated within weeks without an intervening event. I waited again. Pressure does not expose careful people. Accumulation does. The final corroborating element came months later in the form of an annual prescription summary issued by the pharmacy benefit manager. Among routine entries was a short course of an antibiotic prescribed between the 2 screening dates. The medication was one commonly used in response to certain bacterial STI findings, though it is not exclusive to that use. On its own, it proved nothing. In context, it completed the pattern. When I raised the matter again, I did not argue intent or morality. I laid out the documented sequence: 2 preventive screenings, close in time, no disclosed medical concern, an antibiotic consistent with treatment rather than prevention, overlapping travel, and my own negative results. The response followed the same arc as before: denial, attack on my motives, minimization. Only when the records were placed side by side did that posture change. What followed was not a clean confession. It was a partial admission, carefully worded. Physical contact was acknowledged without detail. Exposure was admitted without naming duration. Language was chosen to limit scope rather than clarify truth. That was sufficient. At that point, physical infidelity was no longer speculative. It was supported by institutional documentation, timing, and corroboration. I moved into the spare room quietly. There was no announcement, no confrontation scene. Separation often begins that way in real life. I did not file for divorce immediately. I consulted legal counsel, organized financial records, and created distance gradually. Processes take time when done correctly. She expressed interest in reconciliation while continuing to dispute scale and duration. Information was never volunteered. Admissions remained narrowly framed. Discovery contradicted that framing. Travel records, prescription timelines, and insurance documentation demonstrated repetition. No messages were needed. No eyewitnesses were required. Institutions preserve patterns even when people are disciplined. Formal separation followed months later. Temporary orders came after that. The divorce itself took over a year. There was no dramatic courtroom moment, no emotional resolution, just procedural fatigue and eventual finalization. I kept copies of the insurance records until the decree was entered. After that, I destroyed them, not out of forgiveness, but because I no longer needed proof of something that had already ended my marriage. Some betrayals announce themselves loudly. Others surface quietly, processed through systems that record facts without emotion. Those are harder to argue against and impossible to undo. Thank you for listening. If you found this story worth hearing, please like, share, and subscribe. And before you go, drop a comment below and tell me what you would have done in this situation. I read every one. And until next time, take care.